I'm Tony, and today I'm going to teach you how to make a mat of holding. I'm very excited for this. This is something that I invented a few years ago. I've been bringing them to my shows for quite a few years. And when I'm teaching, there's paper piecing classes that I bring the mats so that people can work on them. And I've been asked numerous times, how do I make it? Can I make one myself? Well, that's what we're doing today. I'm going to show you how to make a mat of holding yourself, and let's get to it. So what is a mat of holding? A mat of holding is a craft mat. It has 3 layers. It has your top fabric, your back fabric, and it's filled with batting. And that allows you to have a nice soft surface to craft on, glue on, sew on, and because it's got batting in here, it's nice and cushioned, so you can put pins in there, magnets, whatever you want. But whenever you're on the go, you can take all of your things, set them to the side, fold your mat up, and then tuck it inside the sleeve that's right here. I've got that. And then you hold it closed with something. You like to use a zip tie Velcro strip that you can hold it closed with. You can also use a rubber band, a hair tie, a scrunchie, whatever you want to keep this closed. And it keeps all of your things inside. I've got a video below that actually goes into it a little bit more and showcases it with a bunch of stuff. So, how do we make this? First, we want to get all of our supplies. I have put all of the measurements of these items down below so that you can go ahead and take a look at those and cut those out. So here is our front of the mat, our little pocket, our back of the pocket, our back of the mat, and a piece of the batting. Step number 1, we want to attach our batting to our backing fabric. In this case, let's see, we cut this exactly the same size. Now, batting will slide and move. It will move all around. So you notice how I'm smoothing it to make sure it covers every bit of this fabric. That's important. You want to make sure that you do that. You cover every single little bit of this fabric. You can use a spray basting on here. You can pin baste this, or you can just wing it. And I'm going to wing it and show you why. Because it is going to stretch and move as we sew it. So let's take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to show you how we're doing this. Now I'm using black thread so you can see the contrast on the batting. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you're starting with the corner that it's got the batting and the backing fabric lined up nice and exact. And then you're going to start sewing a 1/4 inch from the end. You do not want to chain piece. You don't want to start from the very end, a 1/4 inch. Now as you're sewing, you want to make sure to keep the batting and the backing fabric all lined up correctly, just like this. Now, as you're sewing, it's going to push the batting down. So it's going to push that batting fabric down. Because remember I said that the batting is going to stretch and move, especially while you're sewing it. So if you're sewing it, you're actually taking this presser foot and you're pushing this batting down. So I'm going to sew this side, and we're going to go to the end, and I'm going to show you what happens when you reach the corner after it's been pushing. There we are, right here. Now, this batting fabric has been pushed down so that you can see there is extra batting fabric right here. So there's more batting fabric than there is regular fabric. In this case, this is going to happen. It's natural. It's perfectly fine. So what you want to do is you want to stop a 1/4 inch from the end of this black fabric. So it's really hard. You just got to go through and keep going until it's about a 1/4 inch from the end. And I think that is it. So let's check it. I'm going to turn it and then check to see. No, let's go one more stitch. There we are. Now, whenever I turn this and I lift up my batting, you can see that, well, you can't see. Let me pull this over so you can see it. There we go. You can see that my 1/4 inch right here is lined up with this fabric right here. See how that's perfectly lined up there? So with that, now I can start sewing down. Now I like to use a 1/4 inch foot with guide. So this piece of metal right here tells me that I've got an exact 1/4 inch every single time. So let's sew it down. I'm going to sew around the same thing. Now, notice how I'm sewing here, and I've got this fabric right there for the batting. I've done it a couple of times before, but you just basically want to keep an eye on it and then sew all the way down. So now I'm going to finish sewing this all the way around, and then I'll come back and I will show you the what it looks like before we start the next step. And you hit where you started at this area right there. Make sure that you go back and lock these stitches in and then remove it. Do not sew off the end of your fabric. We didn't sew to start coming in, and then whenever we finish, we're not going to sew out. And that's because we've got to trim this batting away. So let me show you how to do that. Now, if you've ever done a French seam, you probably know where I'm going to go with this next step. I'm actually going to trim away a lot of the excess batting, so it's only about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Now, whenever you're trimming this, be very, very careful. You do not cut the backing fabric. So you don't want to cut this black fabric here. You want to cut just the batting. And then as you're cutting it away, you should then be able to see that backing fabric underneath. So you see here, oops, let me go up and show you. So you can see, now I can see that backing fabric. Now, if it's not a perfectly straight seam, that is okay. If you use a pair of scissors that have a very sharp edge on them to be able to get in there and separate the two, then that would be ideal. These are my favorite scissors. They're the Famore 739s. I've got a link down below if you want to take a look at these, but they make this a little bit easier. Now, you may have a jagged edge. That's fine. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight, as long as it's about 1/8 of an inch from your seam. Now, if you do manage to cut your backing fabric, you have to start over, because you need to have that 1/8 of an inch, and you need to have the backing fabric at 1/4 of an inch from your seam. So do not cut that backing fabric. Only cut the batting. So one more time before I speed up the camera. Do not cut the backing fabric. Only cut your batting. All right, I'm going to speed this up, and we'll come back and I will show you the next step. Once you finish, you should see that backing fabric all the way around, just a little bit beyond the batting. If you don't, go back and trim the areas that you need to be able to do that. All right, so now let's start to build our sandwich. We have our top, so we've got our mat, the very front of the mat. We have our sleeves. Now, with the sleeves, we do need to go and sew these together, because remember, it looks like this. So we need to have this seam finished before we make our sandwich. So we're going to take these two pieces of fabric. Make sure you go right sides to right sides. This black has no right side, so it doesn't make a difference. But right sides to right sides. And then we're going to sew just along the edge right here. And then after we sew along the edge right there, we'll iron it. So I'll come back. And so let's go to the machine, sew it, come back, and then I will show you how to iron it. Now, when you iron this, it does not make a difference if you iron the seam in one direction or iron the seam open, because after you iron this, you're just going to take this, flip it, fold it along that seam that you just created. Make sure everything gets nice and lined up, and iron it again. because we want to make sure that this seam right here is nice and crisp. There we are. All right, now let's finish making our sandwich. So we've got our regular fabric. Remember, whenever you're sewing, everything always goes right side to right side, except in the case of this. So this is the step that's important to think about. You have to make sure that the sleeve is face up, just like this, of how we want to see it, because this is all considered one thing, okay? Now, if you are doing a handle, if you're doing a ribbon, at this point, you take your ribbon and you put it in between the two right here, just like this, okay? And then we want to take our backing that already has our batting on there, and we want to place it right side to right side, right on top. Now, if I set it right on top, you notice how I can still see some of the top of my mat. That's okay, because the backing is going to stretch and move a little bit because it is all sewn to the batting. So the natural inclination is it to suck in. So what I want to do, first off, I want to take a pin and hold this right here where my ribbon is. So let's put a pin in this right there to hold that ribbon in. Remember, this is optional. This is if you want to handle as you're holding it. And then we're going to pull this and we're going to clip it. So we want to make sure that everything is lined up, all three layers. So your sleeve, your top, and your back is lined up. And as you're going around and clipping it, just move it around in order to do it. You can also do this with pins. I find clips, the Wonder clips, are actually the best way to hold this. I've got a link to the Wonder clips down below. I don't know, I've tried it with pins. It's actually because of the batting. It's just, for some reason, it doesn't hold as nicely as the Wonder clips. So if you're a bag maker, you understand what I'm talking about, how just with all the layers, just the clips seem to hold better. So then I'm going around and just stretching and moving this to make sure that it lines up. All right, so I'm going to finish clipping this, and then, let's see, stretching it, moving it. I'm going to finish clipping this, and then we're going to move to the sewing machine, where I'm going to show you how to sew this all together. Keep in mind, as you're sewing this, you need to have a hole on one of the longer sides. So this is the longer side here. A hole on one of the longer sides to be able to put your hand in there to flip the whole thing inside out, also known as birthing. So keep that in mind. Now, for me, when I measure it, between these two is my hand size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sewing it right here. I'm going to go all the way around, and then I'm going to finish it right there. Oh, you know what? In fact, let me flip it the other way, because I want to sew it on this side. You don't want to sew it on the batting side. You want to sew it on your top of the mat side, because you want to make sure that you have enough room. You know what? I can probably get rid of this pin here, this clip there. Great. And then there we are. That's enough room for me to put my hand in there between these two clips. That way you can see what's happening. Now, if we were to sew it on this side again, it's going to push that batting around a bit more, and we don't want to do that. We've got that batting secured on here, so it's perfectly fine. So whenever you're sewing on this side, it may push your top fabric a little bit, a little extra. If that happens, same thing. It's perfectly fine. You just have to make sure you keep an eye on the underneath to make sure that you are sewing a 1/4 inch as of this part here. So let's start here. There we are. Okay. And then make sure that you secure those stitches. So you want to back stitch and then start sewing. And you're sewing this again with a 1/4 inch seam all the way around. There we are. And then when you get to the corner, same exact thing you did with that batting, stop a 1/4 inch from the edge, turn it, and keep sewing. So you want to keep on going. If you have problems at the corners, if there's not enough fabric on your feed dogs to grab it and pull it, you can use a safety pin to hook the end and help it along a little bit to get it on that feed dog. But don't do that unless your feed dogs really have some issues. Now, you notice here I'm starting to get a bunch because it's pushing this top fabric. That's what we were trying to avoid with the batting on this side. Perfectly fine. So when you get to the end, you just keep on pushing this out. Stop a 1/4 inch from the edge from this backing fabric here, because you see how this top fabric here is a little bit over. That's fine. We want to stop a 1/4 inch from this backing fabric there and then continue on. Now here is our ribbon. We don't want to take this out. You want to do a horrible thing. Sew over your pin. Go very slowly as you're sewing over that pin because you don't want to hit that pin, because we don't want this to accidentally come loose if you have a handle. All right, so I'm going to sew the rest all the way around, and I will come back whenever I reach the end of sewing this. Now, when you get to this edge here, remember, you need enough room for your entire hand to be able to go through. So because here's where we started, right here. So whenever you go to test it, make sure you got your hand in there. Okay, so this is perfect. This is where I want to go. So I'm going to back this up 3 stitches and then go forward. So I'm going to lock this in place. I'm going to lock my stitches. All right, so let's take this over to the mat so I can show you birthing it. Now, before we birth it, we've got to trim everything. So I'm going to take my pin out. Oh, it's in there nicely. So I can take that out. Then I want to trim any of the fabric that went over top of that backing. Because remember, some of our top fabric stretched and moved. So, oh, there's some right here. So you see how this top fabric stretched and moved right there? We're just going to trim this away. There we are. And now on our corners. If you've done anything with corners before, you know that we want to trim these corners. And what that does is it prevents all of that extra bulk that goes into it whenever we flip it. Now, do not trim the seam. You want to go about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. There we are. And now, let's birth it. So, how you birth it? You want to find your opening, take your hand and put it between your top of your mat and your back of your mat. Do not try to get in between the batting. Remember, the batting is now part of the backing. Put your hand in there, and we want to flip everything inside out. You see why it's called birthing? My friend Fierce Kittens has got an amazing birthing video of how to birth a bag. It's hilarious. So now you want to poke out these corners. I have little tiny fingers, so it's easy for me to poke those out. They're not going to be perfect. They're going to be a little rounded. That is perfectly okay. That's the way that the mat works. So we're going to poke these out as best as we can. If you don't have little fingers like me and can't get it in there, you can use what's called a purple thing. I love my purple thing. I got a link of it down below. You can use a chopstick. You can use basically anything that's got a point that's not a fine point, because you don't want to poke through this. You want to be very gentle and getting it out. There we are. Let's move all of my scraps away. And there is our mat. Oh, you know what I did? Look what I did. Here's my ribbon. Okay, so I messed the ribbon up. The ribbon doesn't go away, the ribbon goes in. So whenever you're setting your ribbon up, away, not in. I'm gonna have to go back and put like a little caption wherever that was, where I pointed the ribbon away and said, no, point it towards. So this one doesn't have a handle, but that's okay. Handle's in there somewhere, it's just fine. All right, so if you did it correctly, you'll have a handle. The handle's optional. All right, so now let's iron this. So what I want to do is tuck this in just like that. I'm going to try to have a nice straight edge right there and then iron it. So this is the opening. So right here is the opening of where I birthed it. So you want to tuck those in and iron it so it stays. And then now we're going to iron the rest of this. There we are. And then now, after ironing it, let's top stitch it. So let's go back to the machine and finish this off. I always like to top stitch starting at where my birthing was, at the opening here, just to make sure that I have it in there nicely. So when you're top stitching, you want to top stitch a 1/4 inch from the edge. You do not want to do a quarter, did I say 1/4 inch? 1/8 of an inch, I'm sorry. You want to top stitch an 1/8 of an inch from the edge because you want to catch every bit of seam that you just did. You can even go a little less than an 1/8 of an inch if you want. As long as it is catching all of the layers and going all the way around. So I'm going to go all the way around, and because remember I've got the very edge right here, if your machine has problems, and then see how close to the edge I am right here? If your machine has problems catching this, you can use that safety pin. And you can use a safety pin to grab it, lift up your presser foot, put the safety pin in, and kind of help it along on your feed dogs. What you don't want to do is have it constantly grind against those feed dogs. Ooh, I got a little bit of, I gotta do some cleanup of threads that got pulled through that I apparently didn't snip before I flipped it inside out. Yeah, whenever you got those, you can totally just clean them up, just trim them. It's perfectly fine. So you don't want it to sit and chew at the edge here because it'll wear away at the fabric. Now this next side is we're going to start where the sleeve is. When you hit that, you notice how I've got to the area where the sleeve is. Kind of be very gentle and slow and make sure you're lifting up your presser foot to catch it, because you don't want to accidentally push it and have it sewn, because if you go too fast it's going to push it and do this, and you don't want that to happen. You want a nice pretty edge. Now why do we top stitch? We top stitch because 2 reasons. Number 1, it finishes it off. Number 2, it holds down all these layers so that when you go to wash it, clean it, that this is not going to come undone and flip around. So it holds everything in place. So this is an important step. Now for this part of the sleeve, you don't have to worry about going slow because you're going the other direction. It's not going to catch. Now, very end, I'm going to trim away my thread that I started with. Let's see, trim, 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 trim. And then I'm going to go to the very end and backstitch it to hold it in place. Now, normally I would suggest matching your thread to whatever your top mat is, not your back, but I wanted to make sure that I showed you how it looked with all of this. And that is how you make a mat of holding. It can hold all your things, use it as a craft mat, do all the things. I hope that you learned something today. I hope that this was informational and you're able to make them. Let me know if you have any other crafts or things that you're like, how do I do this thing? Comment down below. Tell me all the stuff you want to see. People have been asking for this, so I made this one, and there you go. Don't forget to like my video, follow my YouTube as well as Twitter, Instagram, my Quite Nerdy Quilters Facebook group, my Twitch. I stream live on Twitch, so if you have any questions, concerns, or you just want to hang out with me, I post my schedule on Mondays. You can pop in and interact with me live.